crazy, man. Where'd that lizard go? All right, so the newest project we got going here is figuring out how a door should swing open from the top of a stairs. It's actually quite hard. Don't know what I'm doing.
Down Bear, come here.
Well, what I was telling the camera is, don't trip. If you think about it, like when you're coming up, like you would never open it this way, right? You would always,
No.
It's not safe. You would push it out.
Yeah.
If you hinged it on the inside, you could open the gate, easily walk down, and it covers this area.
Right. The way that this is set up though, it would not be conducive to latching it somewhere.
Yeah, if the hinge is here, you can swing it around this way or swing it around that way.
Yeah.
If you had it swing from this way, inside, well, first of all, inside, the gate would then be over the stairs, so you'd have to like come over here.
Like if they're like drunk and they're like, oh, for whatever reason, I don't want to push the door away from me. I want to pull it towards me. That could be dangerous.
Trouble. Big trouble. I think that's the answer, Stancer. Private dancer.
Okay. I thought we were going to like, what's it called? The domain and stuff.
Yeah, we can go shopping.
I need to get my face threaded.
That sounds dangerous. I will never thread my face. That's my next project.
Yay.
Yay. How much are you gonna help? 0. Maybe someday when Tiff's not so pregnant, she'll be back on the channel with a small baby. Or these videos will end because we will not have time to
Holding the little baby.
even deal with shit like this.
He'll want to help in 2 years when he's a toddler.
Help by getting in the way,
Dada,
little punk.
let me follow you.
I already have one of them I have to keep an eye on constantly. She's like, dogs truly are good training because I have to constantly watch her with one eye when I'm working. Come here and admit your fatal flaws. Whoa.
Adios, Fernando.
If you were entertained by that engineering process, then you have to look at my map or my diagram, or I've measured out the dimensions of the gate. So yeah, we're going off of this. Hopefully it's right. So here's where my project really got started. I decided to use 1.5 inch tube to match the rest of the railing. For some reason, I thought it would be easy to use a cutoff wheel to cut perfect cuts on this 1.5 inch tube, but that was actually a bad idea because A, it's difficult to cut straight. Most people you'll see use a cold saw or a chop saw to get consistent cuts. The other problem that I made here, or the other mistake that I made, is that I looked at this like I was going to use butt joints on a perfectly framed box, which at first made sense to me, but after thinking about it, you got to cap every end, which actually creates a lot more work. So at some point, I decided to wise up, but I'm cheap, so instead of buying a cold saw like I should have, I went out and bought this Milwaukee circular saw for metal cutting, and I actually bought a refurbished version, so I got it for pretty cheap. In the end, it's still pretty difficult to get consistent straight cuts that butt up or miter perfectly together. Okay, next step, I have the 2 vertical walls cut to 37 3/4 of an inch, and now I'm gonna have to break out the calculator because I have a hinge. Let's see if you can see this. I have a hinge width that's gonna come off the pole of 1 3/4 of an inch. And then from the other side of the pole, I need, I'm gonna leave an inch gap, or shoot for an inch gap. Why is this confusing? If I'm doing my math right, 40 3/4 on the top and bottom with a 45-degree cut. It's complicated math, you know? Here's where you can see that I actually started to think about doing miter cuts versus butt joints.
Yeah.
Labor. Okay, here's a first look at that Milwaukee circular saw that cuts metal. It's specifically designed for that. It actually does a really good job. I still don't think it's as accurate as a chop saw or a cold saw, but overall, I think it was pretty good. Now here am I trying to fit things together, make sure everything was the correct length, it cornered well, all that fun stuff, using these stupid magnets. Here's more of the saw in action, including just showing off how clean it cuts. So this is a little piece I just cut off, pretty good. And then here's those magnets again. I mentioned I don't like these because they basically magnetize to every little piece of metal speck from the cutoff saw. And they just are extremely dirty and they're hard to clean. They do come in useful when you just need to stage something before tacking it together. So that's why I'm still using them on the corner of this box. I still think some people make clamps. Like I need to invest in those fireball clamps or those corner clamps. I think those would be far more useful. And here comes the welding. My approach to welding this, as I've never welded a box like this, was to start on the outsides, tack all the outsides in a random order. I still did burn through on some of these corners. And it was in particular the places where I didn't have a perfect miter cut, where the miters butted up perfectly to each other, where they had a little bit of a big gap. I guess a big gap, but a decent gap. And that gap is really hard for me. So if you have tips on how to close that gap using flux core on a 220 volt machine, if that even matters, please comment below because I am burning through some of these. Not all of the corners, and maybe I was just running too hot early on, but I always assumed, or when you open your machine, it says what settings to have on 11 gauge steel. But to me, it's not the same if you're welding 11 gauge 4-inch steel pipe as you are 11 gauge 1.5 inch square tubing. So I don't know why that is. It seems like you definitely have to adjust down the smaller metal size overall that you're working on. So basically I burned through a few of the holes, and as you'll see here, I needed to clean it up. As we all do, we're just flattening those welds, flattening the corners a little bit. Since this is a gate, people will have their hands on top of it and probably on the corner of it to open and close it. Here, if I zoom in, you can see a little pinhole, or quite a big pinhole, if you will, in the corner of this one.
Look at the bags, the smut on my face, Marjorie. Next step actually is to take some 4-inch square galvanized fencing stuff and weld it on the inside. So much like the railing up top. So that's all we're doing for the inside. And I happen to have some out here somewhere in the forest, but it's basically this galvanized fencing, if you can kind of see that.
Probably shouldn't step on it, huh?
Protect the eyes. Of course, this piece is a little bent.
So if it's not obvious, what I'm doing here is marking exactly where I need to cut to fit this steel grate or galvanized grate directly into the frame of the gate. And then again, it's time to basically tack weld every point where this steel touches the frame into the perimeter frame, or whatever I'm trying to say. You get it. It was a lot of tack welding. I've never welded on galvanized. I can say that I was not getting a big enough pool around each touch point, at least compared to what the existing gate has, but it ended up working out. You saw there I put a plate or weight plate on top of it just to make sure it sit correctly. And then it's a little hard to see, but I'm using rebar, a piece of 1/2-inch rebar that sits on the floor beneath the grate, and then pressing it down just to help me center where the contact points were on the 1.5-inch square tube. So a lot of tack welding. Basically got to hit 4 sides of every connection point, but pretty easy overall. Obviously the most important thing here is just making sure you cut it perfectly to sit in there. Here's the look at it once it's all the way in and ready to go for additional sanding and paint.
All right, so if you didn't notice during that welding process of this gate, I was terrible at welding. So I have a bunch of gaps and pinholes, pretty large ones in a couple spots where I burned through on the 90-90 angles. I think what happened is when I butted them at the 90s together, my cuts were bad, so I didn't have like a flush cut, and the gaps were pretty large for at least my welding skills to collect and gap over, butt together. Primarily because I'm using flux core, and I think it's just harder to do that. Comment if you know otherwise. So we're gonna attempt to use Bondo to fill in these pinholes, which requires me to start by sanding the area, or I'm using like an Evercoat, same thing as Bondo. So we'll see if we can fix it, and we'll go from that, but I have it all on some wheelie carts, like I like all my stuff in order to fix it. And this gate isn't gonna sit anywhere, but it's completely covered by weather. I think it's structurally totally fine, so even if a little kid hung on it. Between the galvanized fencing in between it, the general welds that were good, like I can't, I'll test it. If it holds me once it's up, I think we're good to go.
And this is me setting up to use Bondo for the first time. This stuff stinks really bad, huh? I wonder if you're supposed to breathe it in that much. I don't know. You can see that I am not very good at applying it. I should have used a smaller drywall, what do you call it, mud application knife. But I didn't happen to have one, or I just couldn't find it easily, so here I'm just smearing it all over. I already kind of knew I would have to sand it over, smooth it all out.
Now starting on series, 35 seconds.
This audio, you stay here for the audio part, you want to make sure
No.
the are pretty good in that chest, but we're also fine, right?
Real quick note here, this is where I'm trying to figure out where I want the hinge, and then I'll also grind off the paint here because I think I'm gonna weld it here. What I actually ended up doing is using a big piece of angle iron, and I face the hinge inward to my left more, so you'll see that in this next clip.
Okay, so what you're looking at here is I basically stage the gate before I start to weld on the hinges, and I just wanted to understand, especially putting the hinge on this side, and I just wanted to understand the spacing, how much it would leave me to actually attach a latch, and it looks like we're gonna be pretty good. There's about somewhere between a 1/2 inch and a full inch for latch spacing, and we don't need a massive latch. It's not like a security latch because the hinge is pretty bulky. And so the reason I'm a little bit nervous about this is that when you take a gate and fit it into an existing railing or walls, you don't really get the opportunity for a lot of adjustment. Whereas if you built this from scratch, you would first line up the hinges, weld the hinges, and then make sure it all fits, if that makes sense. But we're gonna figure it out and hopefully not mess it up. Otherwise, we mess up the whole railing system. That would be very bad. All right, so the very last step in this process is to actually paint this gate. And you probably can't tell in the video, but I have basically neglected painting this final part for like a month. So even got a little rust develop on here, even though it doesn't rain in here. So yeah, final step, just need to clean this off a little and then just gonna spray paint it, tape it up. Nothing like neglecting a project for a month straight when you could just finish it pretty easily. Very professional. Oh shit, I forgot the floor there. That, my friends, is the end of this project. Not the best welds, but they'll hold.